I want to start with a lunchbox. A specific lunchbox. Plastic. Blue. With a broken clasp on the left side that my mother had fixed with a rubber band because we could not afford a new one. I was 11 years old. I carried that lunchbox to school every day for 8 months. Not because I liked it. Because my mother packed it every morning at 5:45 a.m. before her first shift at the factory, and because the lunch inside it, rice and whatever was left from the night before, was the only guaranteed meal of my day. I say guaranteed because lunch at school was not guaranteed. There were days the lunchbox was empty. Not because my mother forgot. Because there was nothing left to put in it. I want to tell you about one of those days. A Wednesday in March. I was 11 years old. I sat down at the cafeteria table with my empty lunchbox, and I opened it and I looked at the nothing inside it and I closed it again. The boy across from me, his name was Derek. He is not important except that he was there. He saw me open it and close it. He said, loud enough for the table to hear, "Marcus doesn't have lunch again." The table looked at me. Not with sympathy. With the specific, casual cruelty of children who have not yet learned that the things they say become part of the people they say them to. Someone laughed. I looked at my lunchbox. I did not say anything. I sat through the lunch period with nothing in front of me and the specific, hollow feeling of someone who is hungry and humiliated simultaneously and who has learned, early and completely, that the two things arrive together. I walked home after school that day. Not the direct route. The long way. Past the big houses on Meridian Street with the cars in the driveways and the specific, warm light in the windows that communicates, from the outside, that the people inside have enough. I looked at those houses. I was 11 years old. And I made a decision. Not a childish decision, not the vague, untethered wanting of a child who sees something and says I want that. A specific decision. The specific, unchildish decision of someone who has been hungry and humiliated simultaneously and who has decided, with the particular clarity that hunger and humiliation together produce, that this is the last time. I said to myself, on that sidewalk, looking at those houses, I am going to build something. Not, I am going to be rich. Not, I am going to show them. I am going to build something. I did not know yet what the something was. But the decision was real. And real decisions have a specific weight that you can feel in your body. I felt it. I walked home. I did not tell my mother about the empty lunchbox or the boy named Derek or the laughter. I did not tell anyone. I kept the decision. And I went to work. My name is Marcus James. I am 38 years old. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, the only child of a single mother named Gloria who worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood and who raised me with the specific, relentless love of someone who has decided that difficulty is not a reason to stop and that her son is going to have what he needs regardless of what it costs her to provide it. She could not always provide enough. I want to say this clearly and without softening it because the truth of it is the foundation of everything that comes after. There were days we did not have enough food. There were months we were not sure about the electricity. There were winters when the heat was managed by closing off the rooms we did not need and living in the 2 that were warmest. We were poor. Not the kind of poor that is a temporary circumstance between better things. The kind that is a condition. The specific, structural, daily poor that organizes every decision around scarcity and that teaches you, before you are old enough to understand what you are being taught, that the gap between what you have and what you need is a gap you are going to be managing for a long time. My mother did not let the condition define us. She did not allow pity, not from others, not from herself. She went to work. She came home. She made food from whatever was available. She attended every school event I had, regardless of the shift, and she sat in the audience with the specific, fierce pride of someone who has decided that her child is worth showing up for. She showed up. For everything. She was the first lesson I ever learned. The lesson was, showing up is the work. I have not forgotten it. The second lesson came from the school itself. Not from a teacher, though there were teachers who mattered and I will tell you about them. From the building. Jefferson Middle School in Detroit. A building that was, by any objective measure, insufficient. Underfunded, over-enrolled, with the specific, visible signs of a place that has been asked to do more than its resources permit, the peeling paint, the textbooks that were 10 years old, the gymnasium that served as an auditorium and a cafeteria and a study hall because there were not enough rooms for the functions a school requires. In that building I learned something that I have thought about every day since. I learned that the resources available to you are not the measure of what you can build. Not because resources do not matter, they matter enormously. The absence of them costs real things. It cost me real things. But the building was full of children who had nothing and who were going to do different things with the nothing. Some of them were going to let the nothing define them. Some of them were not. I decided, at 11 years old on a sidewalk on Meridian Street, that I was not going to let it define me. That decision was the second lesson. You decide what the nothing means. It does not decide for you. I want to tell you about the teachers. Because this is an honest story and honesty requires me to tell you that I did not build what I built alone. Nobody builds anything alone. The people who tell you they did are not telling you the full story. The full story always includes the people who showed up. Mrs. Patricia Allen. 7th grade English. She was 51 years old when she was my teacher. She had been teaching at Jefferson for 22 years. She was the specific kind of teacher who looks at a student and sees not the student they are but the student they are going to be and who teaches to that future student rather than the present one. She saw me. Not my circumstances. Not the empty lunchbox or the rubber band clasp or the specific, visible signs of a child who does not have enough. Me. The specific, particular person I was. She handed me a book in October of 7th grade. She put it on my desk after class. She said, "This is for you. Not for class. For you." I looked at the book. It was a biography. I will not tell you whose biography because the specific person is not the point. The point is what Mrs. Allen said when she handed it to me. She said, "This person started with less than you have and built more than you can currently imagine. I want you to read it not as a story about someone else. I want you to read it as a story about what is possible." I said, "Why me?" She said, "Because you are paying attention in a way that most people are not. And the people who pay attention are the ones who build things." I took the book home. I read it in 4 days. Then I read it again. Then I went back to Mrs. Allen and I said, "Do you have another one?" She had another one. She had many more. For the rest of 7th grade and through 8th grade she gave me books. Not the signed books. Chosen books. selected specifically for me with a specific, attentive knowledge of someone who has been watching what a person responds to and who gives them more of what grows them. Mrs. Allen was the third lesson. The lesson was, the right person handing you the right thing at the right moment can change the entire trajectory. Be open to receiving it. And when you have built what you are going to build, give it back. High school. I want to be honest about high school. It was hard. Not the academics I could manage. But the specific, daily social weight of being the kid who did not have the things that other kids had. I did not have the right shoes. I did not have the right phone. I did not have the specific, casual abundance that most of the people around me had grown up inside and that they wore, without knowing they were wearing it, as a kind of invisible uniform. I worked. After school. Weekends. First at a grocery store, bagging, stocking, the specific, physical work of a 16-year-old who needed money and was willing to do whatever produced it. Then at a car wash. Then at a diner where I worked weekend mornings and where the cook, a man named Robert who had been at the diner for 30 years and who had the specific, particular gift of someone who makes people feel welcome without trying, taught me something about food and service and the specific dignity of work that feeds people. Robert is the reason I understand hospitality. He never charged me for meals. He never made a production of it. He simply left food for me at the end of shifts in the specific, quiet generosity of someone who understands that the person beside you is hungry and that the right response to that is to feed them and not to make them feel fed. Robert was the fourth lesson. The lesson was, quiet generosity is the most powerful kind. The kind that does not require the recipient to feel grateful. The kind that simply provides. I have not forgotten Robert. I have tried, in the building of everything I have built, to be Robert to as many people as possible. I got into the University of Michigan. Full scholarship. Not because doors opened for me. Because I had worked for 3 years after school and on weekends while maintaining grades that told the scholarship committee that I was someone who could do more with an opportunity than waste it. The day I received the acceptance letter, my mother was at work. I called her at the factory. She answered. They were not supposed to take personal calls on the floor, but her supervisor, a woman named Linda who had known my mother for 12 years, always let her answer my calls. I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Marcus. I said, Mom. She said, you did it. I said, we did it. She said, no. I made lunches. You did this. I said, the lunches were not always. I know, she said. I know they were not always enough. I am sorry for that. I said, Mom. The lunches were enough. She was quiet. I said, everything you gave me was enough. It was always enough. She cried. Not quietly. The real kind. The specific, released kind of someone who has been holding something for 17 years and has finally found the place where the holding can end. I held the phone. I let her cry. Then she said, Go. Go do what you are supposed to do. I said, I will come home. She said, I know you will. University of Michigan. 4 years. Business administration. I want to tell you what those 4 years were rather than the version that makes them sound cinematic. They were work. I was on scholarship, but scholarship does not cover everything, and everything that scholarship does not cover has to come from somewhere. I worked. Campus jobs. Off-campus jobs. The specific, grinding double life of someone who is in class from 8 to 3 and working from 4 to 10 and studying from 11 to whenever the studying is done. I slept approximately 5 hours a night for 4 years. I did not complain. Not because I was not tired. Because complaining requires energy that can be redirected. I redirected. I also found something in those 4 years that I had not been looking for, and that changed the direction of everything. I found the thing I was going to build. Not immediately. In year 2. Year 2 of university, I took an elective course in real estate fundamentals. Not because I had a plan. Because the course fit my schedule. The professor was a man named Dr. Harold Chin, who had spent 20 years in commercial real estate before transitioning to academia, and who had the specific, practical gift of someone who teaches not from textbooks but from experience. He said, in the first class, something that I wrote down and have not thrown away. He said, real estate is the most democratic wealth builder that exists. It does not care where you started. It does not care what your name is or where your parents went to school. It cares about one thing. Whether you understand value. Whether you can see what something is worth before everyone else can see it. That is the skill. Everything else is detail. I looked at that sentence in my notebook. Whether you can see what something is worth before everyone else can see it. I had been doing that my entire life. At 11 years old on Meridian Street, I had seen what those houses represented before I could articulate what I was seeing. I had spent 17 years developing the specific, trained attention of someone who notices value and potential in things that other people have not fully evaluated. I had been doing the thing without knowing the thing had a name. Dr. Chen's class gave it a name. I went to Dr. Chen after class. I said, I want to learn everything. He looked at me. He said, then come to office hours. I went to every office hour for 3 years. He taught me. Not formally. Not with a curriculum. The way Robert had taught me about hospitality, through presence and example, and the specific, patient willingness of someone who sees something in a person and decides it is worth investing in. Dr. Chen was the 5th lesson. The lesson was, find the person who sees what you are going to be and sit in every room they offer. I graduated at 22. I had no capital. I had no connections in the real estate industry. I had the scholarship repayment grace period of 6 months before my student loan interest began accruing. I had Dr. Chen's phone number. And I had the decision I had made at 11 years old on a sidewalk in Detroit. I am going to build something. The first years were the hardest. Not hard in the specific, dramatic way of a story that requires obstacles that announce themselves. Hard in the specific, quiet way of someone who is trying to build something real with insufficient resources in an industry that is not organized to welcome people who look like me or who come from where I come from. I want to be honest about this. Real estate, particularly commercial real estate, is an industry with specific, established networks. People know people. Deals happen in rooms that you need to be in to know about. Capital goes to people who already have capital. The specific gravity of the industry pulls toward the already established. I was not already established. I was 22 years old with a business degree from Michigan and an understanding of value that Dr. Chin had helped me develop and nothing else. I knocked on doors. Not metaphorically. Literally. I walked into the offices of real estate firms in Detroit and I asked to speak to someone. Most of the time I was told no one was available. Sometimes I was told to leave my resume. Twice I was told, in the specific, careful language of people who want to be polite while being dismissive, that they were not hiring at this time. I went back to every door. Multiple times. Not because I did not understand the no. Because I understood that consistent presence creates familiarity and familiarity creates opportunities that would not exist without the presence. I was present. The job came in month 4. Not the job I had imagined. An administrative position at a small commercial real estate firm in downtown Detroit. Not a broker position. Not an analyst position. Administrative. Filing. Scheduling. The specific, invisible infrastructure work that makes offices function and that most people who have degrees consider beneath them. I did not consider it beneath me. I considered it a door. I took the job. I filed and scheduled and made coffee and managed calendars, and I also, in every available moment, watched. The specific, trained watching of someone who understands that everything in a room is information if you know how to receive it. I watched how deals were structured. I watched how negotiations progressed. I watched how value was assessed and communicated and how the gap between what something was worth and what someone would pay for it was managed. I watched for 2 years. And I asked questions. Not of the senior brokers, they were too busy and too aware of the hierarchy to welcome questions from the administrative assistant. Of the junior analysts. Of the people one level above me who were recent enough to their own learning that they remembered what it was like to not know. I asked questions. I took notes. I built a library of knowledge. The first deal. I need to tell you about the first deal because the first deal is the hinge. The thing that turns everything. I had been at the firm for 2 years. I had saved every dollar that was not necessary, not every dollar, that is not possible. But every dollar that was not necessary. I had saved $11,000. $11,000 is not enough for commercial real estate. I knew this. What I also knew, from 2 years of watching every deal that passed through that office, was that $11,000 was enough for something that other people had not noticed. A property. A small commercial property on a street in Detroit that was, by the current accounting of the market, undervalued. Not dramatically undervalued. Not in a way that would have excited anyone at the firm who was looking at it with the specific, trained eyes of someone who understood where the market was going. Undervalued in the way that only someone who had grown up in Detroit and who had spent 11 years walking past houses on Meridian Street and asking what is this worth could see. I had grown up in Detroit. I had spent 11 years developing that question. I saw it. I bought it. Not with $11,000 alone. With $11,000 and a conversation with a community development bank that specialized in exactly the kind of investment I was describing and that had, after a 2-hour meeting during which I presented a property analysis that Dr. Chin later told me was the best first deal analysis he had ever reviewed, agreed to co-invest. The deal closed on a Thursday. I stood outside the property after the closing. It was a Wednesday evening. November. Detroit in November. I stood outside a commercial property that I now owned a significant share of, and I thought about the blue lunchbox with the broken clasp. I thought about the empty lunchbox and the boy named Derek and the laughter. I thought about my mother at the factory saying the lunches were not always enough, and I am sorry for that. I thought about Mrs. Allen and the biography she put on my desk. I thought about Robert, who left food at the end of shifts without making a production of it. I thought about Dr. Chen saying whether you can see what something is worth before everyone else can see it. I stood outside the property for a long time. Then I called my mother. She answered. I said, "Mom." She said, "Marcus, it is late." I said, "I bought a building." She was quiet. Then she said, "A building?" I said, "A small one." She said, "Marcus." I said, "I know." She said, "Your father." She stopped. My father had not been there for any of it. I said, "Mom." She said, "I know. I know. I just." She stopped again. Then she said, "I am so proud of you." I said, "You showed me how." She said, "I made lunches." I said, "You showed up every day for everything. That is the whole lesson. You showed up." She cried. I let her. Then she said, "A building." I said, "A building." She said, "The first one." I said, "Yes." She said, "Tell me when there are more." I said, "I will call you after every one." There were more. I will not give you the full accounting of 15 years because 15 years of deals is not a story. What I will give you is the shape. Year 3, I sold the first property at a profit that was specific and significant, and that went immediately into the next deal. Year 5, I had 4 properties and 2 employees. Year 7, I had a portfolio and a reputation in Detroit's commercial real estate community as someone who saw value before the market saw it. Year 9, I opened a second office. Year 11, I made my first deal in Chicago. Year 13, I was in Detroit and Chicago and Cleveland, and I had 22 employees and a portfolio that I will not describe in dollar terms because the dollar terms are not the story. Year 15. Year 15, I was 37 years old. And the deal that year 15 produced was the deal that brought everything I am about to tell you to the moment it was always building toward. The building. In Detroit. Not just any building in Detroit. The building on Meridian Street. Not the specific house I had looked at as an 11-year-old, those were residential and not my market. But the commercial property at the end of Meridian Street. The property that had, over the years, housed various businesses of varying duration. The property that had sat empty for 3 years. The property that the group of investors who owned it were now looking to sell. I knew this because I had been watching it for 7 years. Waiting for it to become available. Knowing, with the specific, patient certainty of someone who had developed the ability to see what something was worth before everyone else, that when it became available it was going to be the right deal. It became available in March of year 15. I made an offer. It was accepted. The closing was on a Thursday. I stood outside the property after the closing. Meridian Street. 37 years old. I had walked this street as an 11-year-old looking at houses with warm light in the windows. I was standing at the end of it. Owner of a property on a street that had, 26 years earlier, been the street where a boy with an empty lunchbox had made a decision. I stood there for a long time. I did not call my mother immediately. I just stood there. And I thought about the decision. I am going to build something. I had built it. Not finished. Building is never finished. But the building was real and it was on Meridian Street and it was mine. The meeting. 2 months after the Meridian Street closing. A meeting that I want to tell you about carefully because it is the moment this story has been building toward. Not dramatically, you know by now that I do not do dramatic. In the specific, quiet way of something that resolves itself. I was in a development meeting. One of many I attend in a given month. This one was with a group of potential partners on a mixed-use development project. 8 people around a conference table. The meeting had been organized by an intermediary, a real estate attorney who worked with multiple parties in the Detroit market and who had brought this group together. I arrived at the conference room. I was the last to arrive. I opened the door. I walked to the empty seat. And I looked at the people at the table. 6 of them I did not know. One of them I recognized as the attorney who had organized the meeting. And one of them was Derek. The boy from the cafeteria table. 27 years older. Heavier. The hair thinner. The specific, settled quality of someone who has built a comfortable life and who moves through the world with the assurance of someone who has not had to question that comfort. He did not recognize me immediately. I sat down. The meeting began. The attorney introduced everyone. He introduced me last. He said, and Marcus James, founder and CEO of James Commercial Properties, which I think many of you will know as one of the most significant development firms operating in the Detroit market. Derek looked up when the attorney said my name. He looked at me. He looked at me with the specific, searching quality of someone who is trying to place a face. Then he placed it. I watched it happen. The specific, sequential recognition on someone's face when they understand what they are looking at. The cafeteria. The empty lunchbox. The laughter. Marcus doesn't have lunch again. He looked at me. I looked at him. I did not smile. I did not do anything with my face. I looked at him the way I look at everyone in a professional meeting, with the specific, neutral attention of someone who is assessing whether this person is someone worth building with. Then I turned back to the attorney. And the meeting continued. After the meeting, the room was clearing. Derek came to me. He stood in front of me with the specific, uncomfortable quality of someone who needs to say something and is not sure how. I waited. He said, Marcus. I said, Derek. He said, I want to say something. I said, say it. He said, I am sorry. For what I said. When we were kids. The thing I said about your lunch. I looked at him. Not with the performance of magnanimity. With the genuine assessment of someone who is determining what this apology means. I said, you were 11 years old. He said, yes. I said, 11-year-old cruelty is real. The damage of it is real. But I do not carry it as an injury anymore. I carry it as information. He said, information about what? I said, about what hunger and humiliation together produce in a person who decides they are not going to be defined by them. He was quiet. I said, they produced this. Whatever this is. He looked at me. He said, what does this mean for the project? I said, it means nothing for the project. The project is a business decision. Business decisions are made on the merits. You bring what you bring to the table and I will evaluate it the same way I evaluate everything. He said, that is. I said, straightforward. Yes. He nodded. He held out his hand. I shook it. He left. I stood in the conference room alone for a moment. I thought about the cafeteria table. I thought about the lunchbox. I thought about Meridian Street and the decision. And I thought about something Mrs. Allen had said to me in 7th grade when I had gone back to tell her what the biography had meant. She had said, Marcus, the goal is not to become someone who makes the people who doubted you regret the doubting. The goal is to become someone who does not need them to regret it. I had not fully understood that at 13. I understood it at 38. Standing in a conference room on Meridian Street. I did not need Derek to regret the doubting. I did not need the laughter to have cost him anything. I had built what I built not for the people who laughed. For the 11-year-old on the sidewalk who had made a decision. For my mother at the factory. For Mrs. Allen and Robert and Dr. Chin. For the people who had shown up. I had built it for them. And for the people I was going to be Robert for. The ones who would come after. The ones who needed someone to leave food at the end of a shift without making a production of it. That was the building. That was what it was for. My mother came to the Meridian Street property in April. I had not told her where it was until she was in my car. We drove through Detroit. She was looking out the window. I turned onto Meridian Street. She looked at the street. She looked at me. She said, Marcus. I said, yes. She said, this is the street. I said, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you walked this street. I said, many times. She said, looking at the houses. I said, yes. She said, and now? I pulled up to the property. I parked. I said, and now I own the end of it. She looked at the building. She looked at the street. She looked at me. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, the lunchbox. I said, what? She said, I always knew the lunchbox was not enough. I always knew. And I could not fix it. I could make food from nothing and I could work 2 jobs and I could show up for everything but I could not fix the lunchbox. She looked at her hands. I have thought about that lunchbox for 27 years, she said. I said, Mom. She looked up. I said, the lunchbox was the building. She looked at me. I said, the empty lunchbox was the thing that made me walk down the street and look at those houses and decide. It was the thing that made the decision possible. Without the empty lunchbox there is no building. She was quiet. I do not want you to carry the lunchbox as a failure, I said. I want you to know that the lunchbox was the beginning of this. She looked at the building. She looked at the street. Then she looked at me. She said, "My boy." Just that. My boy. I held my mother's hand on Meridian Street. The specific hand that had fixed the broken clasp with a rubber band. The specific hand that had packed food from nothing for 27 years. The specific hand that had showed up. For everything. We sat for a long time. Then she said, "Take me inside." I said, "Yes." I got out of the car. I opened her door. I walked my mother into the building on Meridian Street. And she walked through it the way someone walks through something that matters. Slowly. Carefully. With the specific, full attention of someone who is receiving something real. I am 38 years old. James Commercial Properties has offices in Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, and Atlanta. I have 41 employees. I have a foundation, the Gloria James Foundation, named for my mother, that provides educational grants to students in Detroit who are on free and reduced lunch programs. Not because I need the foundation to make the story complete. Because Mrs. Allen gave me a biography. Because Robert left food at the end of shifts. Because Dr. Chen held office hours. Because the people who showed up for me require that I show up for the people who come after. That is the accounting. Not the dollars. The showing up. The boy named Derek is not involved in the Meridian Street project. The deal did not work out on the merits. Not because of the cafeteria. Because the numbers did not support the partnership. I evaluate everything on the merits. That is the only way to build something that lasts. Before you go, I want to say something directly. To anyone who has sat with an empty lunchbox. To anyone who has been laughed at for what they did not have. To anyone who has walked past the houses with the warm light in the windows and felt the specific, simultaneous weight of hunger and wanting. The decision is available to you. Not the specific decision I made, your decision will be your own. But the deciding. The specific moment of deciding that the not having is information rather than definition. That the hunger is fuel rather than verdict. That the laughter, the humiliation, the empty lunchbox, these things can become the beginning of the building instead of the end of the trying. The decision is available. Right now. On whatever sidewalk you are standing on. Look at the houses with the warm light. And decide. Then go to work. Drop the word lunchbox in the comments if this story reached something real in you. Lunchbox for the blue plastic one with the broken clasp. Lunchbox for every empty thing that became the beginning of a full one. And if you are new here, subscribe. Every single day I share a new story about family, about building, about the people who decided that the nothing they started with was going to become the something they built. I will see you in the next one. Kayla's Dark Truth.